In this video, we're going to be talking about the initial ad spend. What is the process that we're going to be using to set our clients their initial targets and their initial budget? So for many of your clients, this will be the first time that they've had any type of marketing budget. So it's really important that we know the purpose of why we even want to do marketing in the first place. So the purpose of why we're going to be doing lead generation ads is to generate qualified leads. These are people that pass the criteria of what your client has told us to bring. They've chopped that down into qualifying questions, and we can get these people's contact information with their consent to be contacted at the lowest cost possible. Therefore, a successful campaign is going to be measured from our side anyway of how many qualified leads we can send through to our client. Do not get this mixed up with making sales. Yes, I know the main reason your clients want to work with you is because they want to make more money and sell more of their products, but sales is not your responsibility. Like, your job is to ask your clients, what is a good lead? You get a criteria and you make sure you're sending them the leads. If these people can't sell to those leads, that is not your fault. And there is no amount of marketing that can save a bad sales process, because the majority of your clients, they are able to convert leads that come from referrals or any of these organic ways because they have a pre-bias in wanting to work with this person. Taking a complete stranger from the internet and raising their interest level enough to the point where they're willing to part with their money to work with you, is a completely different ball game, and they will need to spend a lot of time working on their sales processes. So remember, there's no amount of marketing that can save a bad sales process, and there's no sales process that can send a bad product or service. So, making sure you're picking the right niche from the get-go, like we spoke about in the offer creation, you got to make sure that you're choosing your battles wisely. So the purpose of advertising is to essentially help these businesses scale the number of customers that they require. But however, if you want to grow the amount of customers, there is always a cost associated to doing that. Marketing always costs money. So these businesses that you're working with now and the people that you're going to be trying to be working with, a lot of them accept that they're going to have to give up a small piece of the pie if they want to have a bigger pie in the future. So what this is all talking about is something called a CPA, which is otherwise known as a cost per acquisition, which essentially means how much do you need to spend on ads in order to generate a sale. In an ideal world, we want to keep our cost per acquisition as low as possible for our clients. But the reality is the cost of even running ads and buying customers, which is what marketing does, has gone up significantly over the last few years. So a strong benchmark on what I like to do for most businesses is we're aiming for a 3x return on ad spend, which means our cost per acquisition should be around 33% of the sale value that it costs to sell one product or service. So as a quick example, if our client was selling something like an Invisalign treatment for £3,000, we would be open to spending, investing £1,000 on ads in order to make a sale for £3,000 that it would not have had unless we did these ads. So we're trying to trade £1 in order to get £3 back. Anything under that is very, very, very unrealistic. You'll speak to some clients that are convinced that they want a 10x return, a 40x return, all these things. That might be possible, but I don't know how to do that, and there's not many people that know how to do that, and a lot of the time that's because of factors outside your control. So, to manage your clients' expectations, we're always aiming for a 3x return on marketing. So to calculate our own client's cost per acquisition target, we need to understand how much is their average order value, how much they usually sell their product or service for, and then we're going to divide that by 3. That is going to be our realistic cost per acquisition target. You need to make sure the client understands from the get-go that spending 33%, giving them a 3x return, is an extremely reasonable cost to acquire someone through from the ads. If you skip this stage and you don't manage that client's expectation, you're going to be losing your own money, because if you're bringing them a 3x return, but their expectations are like a 20, a 15, or a 10, or a 5, they're going to leave, aren't they? Normally, you've done all this work, setting this client, bringing them results, and they just churn. If you're churning clients, it's going to be impossible for you to really grow your agency. So just take a minute at the beginning to let them know we're aiming for a 3x return. If you get this, that's really good. High ticket offers make this way, way, way easier. Like I said at the beginning of this course, is that you need to be picking your battles. Lead generation ads do not work for people with low ticket offers. For example, if we've got a client, they're spending £1,000 to acquire a customer because they're selling something for £3,000, so they're open to losing £1,000. That is way easier, and obviously we're going to get way more leads than a client who's selling something for £120. They're only giving us 40 quid to get a customer in. Like, the leads are going to be expensive either way. You may as well try to be sell things which are expensive. So you're giving yourself more margin to play with, and you can get more leads for it. So once we've calculated our client's cost per acquisition target, so we've taken the cost of what they usually sell their service for, we've divided it by 3. This is going to become our main KPI. A KPI is an abbreviation for something called a key performance indicator. That's when your client doesn't want to understand, the click-through rate and all these other complicated metrics. They just need to look at one thing and be able to understand if the campaign is kind of working or not. So our KPI is going to be, we want to be trying to get a 3x return. Now, take that with a pinch of salt, because this 3x cost per acquisition rule is only a rough guideline. It is going to depend and vary a little bit on their service. Always consider the client's profit margins before you set this final cost per acquisition target. So once we've managed our client's expectation on what we're trying to get a sale for, again, if I was spending £1,000, if the client was selling something for £1,000, I'd be setting a cost per acquisition target of around 330 quid. We need to put in our initial ad spend. So ads are very, very, very difficult to work if you spend under £30 a day. And even that is arguably on the low side. So in terms of what we want to be setting our initial budget for, if the ticket cost is under £1,000, or a client sells their service for under £1,000, I think for that first month, put their initial spend at £30 a day. However, the way that I actually recommend to do this, and a better way, is to base their initial budget on the value of one sale. So if I was selling a course for £3,000, I would be open to spending £3,000 a month for my first initial month of ad spend. It's just a really clear number then, isn't it? Because I know I'm going to get loads of leads for that. If I just sell to one of those leads, then I'm going to be break even. Anything above that is essentially going to be my gross profit. Hopefully all of you are selling stuff for people which is over £1,000. So that is always going to be my preferred method of what I recommend you do. There are a couple of business models that are exceptions to this 3x cost per acquisition rule. These are example of 2. If you're working with companies that have a recurring revenue model, so subscriptions, let's pretend that they pay £1,000 for their first purchase, and then in the next month they pay £1,000. Stuff like marketing agencies, AI automation agencies, stuff like this. So if that is the case and it is recurring, obviously their lifetime value is much higher. So in that first month, their cost per acquisition target should be the full cost of their first month subscription. So if I'm selling something for £1,000 a month, I'm happy to lose £1,000 on that first month. I'm happy to not make any money off them in their first purchase, because by me keeping them, that's when I can take the profit. The model that I tell you guys to do, the model that I do, and probably one of the easiest ones to make work on ads, is the setup cost and then recurring payment subscription thing. So if your setup fee is £2,000, and then once you've set it up, then you're getting that recurring payment of £500 a month. Be willing to lose be willing to get rid of that whole setup fee in order to get on a client, because that gives us massive margins to play with in terms of bringing someone in, and then our profit can come from the recurring payments. So this would be the exception to when you don't do that 3x cost per acquisition. Important factors. Cost per acquisition is going to improve over time. It is typically going to take 3 months for the client to truly understand their real cost per acquisition. This is why before the market obviously got a bit saturated and become the norm to, not time people in for these long agreements that everyone feels uncomfortable doing. Most agencies not that long ago used to only work on a minimum of 3-month contract. You want to try do this with your clients. Most people, the good business owners, they're quite open to this as well because they understand that. But you've got to invest in building that pipeline, because in that first month, if you think about it, that client is starting with 0 people in their pipeline. So the only sales that they can possibly make are from the leads that you've generated in that first month. There's no one to pre-nurture or pre-convert. You fast forward a little bit and let's say we're in month 3. They're obviously going to make more sales in month 3 because they have the opportunity to sell to the people that you got in month 3. But they can also convert people from month 2 and month 1, because the majority of people that sign up for anything are not in a position that they're ready to buy, ready to go. It's really important you align your clients with this and take some time to make sure that they understand how this pipeline build is going to work. Because if these guys are not willing to give this a proper chance to work, like, it's just not going to work, is it? And also, you don't want to put in all this effort for people if they're just going to churn. It's a process that you're committing to. So here's a diagram which demonstrates if that client just spent £1,000 a month every single month for 6 months, this is what their results could look like. So in month 1, they're spending £1,000. We get them 60 leads. And they ended up taking 15 calls and, they made no sales. So the cost per acquisition is literally 0. Now, it doesn't mean this is not working. We got to give people a long enough period of time in order for them to become a customer. In month 2, I spent another 1,000. So their spend is up to 2K, 100 leads, double the amount of calls, 30 calls. And now they've only made 1 sale. So now their cost per acquisition is £2,000, which looks pretty high, right? They're literally just breaking even on that ad spend, which is not good. But then in month 3, something happens. Spend another grand. So the ad spend is 3K. We've got 150 leads, 45 calls. So the calls have tripled. But now they've made 3 sales. And it's probably because someone in month 2 and month 1, that's maybe where all those 3 sales would have come from. And that's actually shrunk their cost per acquisition by loads, because 3 sales divided by 3K's worth of ad spend, now their cost per acquisition is dropped from £2,000 to £1,000 in just a month. 50% reduction. So really good. And then this is what we tend to see. Your goal is to keep these people, because in month 6, if that client would have spent 6 grand, that means 300 leads, probably around 90 calls. If they just did 12 sales, now you've got a cost per acquisition of £500, which is really, really, really good. So you got to make sure that your clients are open to giving you enough opportunity to build that pipeline, because that's the only way they're going to make sales, by the way. And it just means that they have longer to nurture these leads and to give people the time that they need in order to become a customer. And if they're willing to do that, their cost per acquisitions will want to really drop. And the longer they do it, typically the lower cost per acquisitions people have. So now that we know what we're doing and we're setting some targets, we've aligned our clients' expectations of this is how much we're trying to get customers for. It can still be quite hard for someone to get their head around and comprehend what that actually means in terms of the numbers, because they don't have the same dashboard as you. They're not seeing how much I spend every day or whatever. So a better way of calculating it is, once you've been running that campaign for like a week, 2 weeks, a month, you can go into the ads manager and you can see how much you actually getting that client a lead for. And then you want to take your target cost per acquisition. So for example, let's pretend a lead costs £20 and I'm giving myself £1,000 to spend in order to get a client. I would do 20 divided by £1,000. So cost per lead divided by cost per acquisition target. I can turn around to my client and say, you need to convert 1 in 50 leads in order to hit our target. And then you're giving them some responsibility and you're essentially giving them some sales targets. Most people will find it easier to kind of calculate it like that. And obviously when you sit down and have these performance reviews with them, you say, right, we set you a target of, I need you to convert 1 in every 50 leads. I've sent you 200 leads this month. Your KPI target should be 4 sales. How many sales have you done? That's a much easier way for someone to calculate if it's working or not. If you wanted to check the cost per leads, obviously you can just go into that ads manager account. And if you scroll over, you will see a section that says cost per result, like it is here. You can use that to kind of benchmark the average cost per lead. So just another example, we can say our client is selling Invisalign teeth straightening for £3,000. We've set them a cost per acquisition target of £1,000 because we're trying to make a 3x return. So 3,000 divided by 3 would be £1,000. Let's pretend we generate the leads for £30 each. That way we can set our clients a sales target, which is you need to convert 1 out of 34 leads in order to make sure that every time you invest in £1,000, you're doing a deal. £1,000 will give you around 34 leads, and at that point you need to make a sale. You sit down with them at the end of that month and just kind of go through it like that. It tends to be a way that people prefer and just makes things a lot clearer. You'll be really surprised if you just lay out like this from the get-go and manage people's expectations and put some responsibility on their shoulders. Make sure they understand that you can't do anything to help their sales process. Converting 1 in 34 people is extremely realistic. They're probably, as long as you word it like this and break it down like this, if they're not signed to 1 in 34 people, they're not going to turn around to you and say, oh, their leads are crap. Well, all 34 leads are bad. Obviously not. Something to do with their sales process. But if you're going to be calling people out for their sales processes and holding them accountable, you're going to need to know, you need to make sure you can explain to them in a way which is dead clear that it is something to do with their sales process. And that's the beauty of these KPIs. There's no hiding. Final thing, once we understand our client's cost per acquisition target, Our goal as the marketer is to send them as many qualified leads at the lowest possible rate that we can. So we want to be doing things that decrease our cost per lead, because if the cost per lead, for example, is £20 and our clients have £1,000 to spend, they need to convert one in every 50 leads. I think if we could shrink that to £10, then they need to convert one in 100 leads to kind of maintain the target. So by us shrinking their cost per lead, it means they have to be less good at sales, which is going to help us retain the client, right? So some cheat codes and quick things you can do to help decrease your cost per lead. You need to make sure that the radius is open to as large of audience as possible. It is more likely you want to find someone that wants this if you were targeting the whole of the UK and a tiny section of the country. You should remove or adjust any qualifying questions that create unnecessary friction. You know, they're just worded in a complicated way, or it's too of an aggressive cut, or it's not allowing people to come in because the client says they need to work right now instead of maybe next month. You know, that's still a good lead, right? So be cautious of them. And, you know, the only real way, when you really boil it down, though, to reduce this cost per lead is by testing new and better ad creatives. You know, there's only so many things you can do with these targeting hacks, which aren't really a thing anymore. And, you know, changing the qualifying questions, which can put you at risk at decreasing lead quality 99.9% of the time. It's going to be about your skill level to create new ad creatives. So there's more on that in a later video. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Looking forward to the next one.